some breaking news that has just dropped in our email inboxes as we were about to start this podcast. And that is that Logan Sargeant is out at Williams, the only American driver in the grid, out, an Argentinian, Franco Colapinto, taking his place from the Italian Grand Prix, which is this weekend, onwards. It's a story that we thought was developing to some extent as we were leaving, well, basically as from the point that Sargeant crashed on Saturday in final practice at Zandvoort. But there were a number of names being thrown around at that time. We were hearing Liam Lawson as a potential driver. Of course, he was at AlphaTauri last year and also is the Red Bull reserve driver. Mick Schumacher was another one we heard about. But Franco Colapinto, who was the Williams reserve, he's part of the young driver program. He's been racing in F2 throughout this season. He's in. So, Nate, let's start here. What do we make of this change?
Yeah, pretty surprising. I mean, not the fact that Sargeant was out, but the fact that it's Colapinto whose name is going to be above that garage at Monza. But I think the more you digest it, the more it makes a lot of sense. So, we wrote the story, didn't we, on Sunday? We got, different bits of information about, to me, something that I think really escalated the fact that we knew Sargeant was going to be out, regardless of who replaced him, which was the fact that after qualifying, James Vowles kind of went very, very purposefully over to Red Bull, spoke to Christian Horner about getting Liam Lawson. So that's where those rumors came from. Williams did look into that. I got mixed messages from Red Bull about their openness to doing that deal. Obviously, there's a lot of risks that come with that. If Lawson spins out a couple of times, has a bad time with Williams, maybe it's hurt him in the long run in terms of giving him a Red Bull seat. But what it did confirm to us was that Vowles, I think that crash of Sargeant with that, just so many upgrades on the car. I mean, the first shot of that after he crashed was all of the mechanics who had just been working so hard to improve that team's fortunes. You knew that they were just fed up and they were done with it. And I spoke to people at the team who said similar. My first reaction to this was actually that what a great time we're kind of living through in F1 at the moment, because this is another team that has, not for Logan Sargeant, but I mean from the context of we've got another team that's giving a young driver who's part of their academy a legitimate chance in Formula One. We know that Mercedes is about to do that with Kimi Antonelli. We've seen Oliver Behrman with Ferrari progress through, and so long, it wasn't the case, was it? You'd get, just random drivers coming in and out and stuff like that. So as much as this is bad news for Logan Sargeant, I don't think anything is surprising in that sense, because he's not taken that opportunity and delivered on it like he should have done. But I don't know much about Franco Colapinto. I've got to be honest. I've obviously seen his name on the timing screens when the Formula 2 races are on in the paddock. But yeah, just a really exciting opportunity for him. And it actually makes sense. People might say, well, he might just be as error prone as Sargeant. But I think if you're Williams right now, that the medium-term future of your team is that Carlos Sainz is coming in with Alex Albon. It's unlikely, if that goes right, you're going to need to think about a replacement driver for either of those two, other than, something unforeseen happening, like one of them getting injured or something like that. So knowing what you've got with Colapinto makes a lot of sense here, understanding, is this guy someone who we can throw in at the deep end if needs be? Sargeant clearly doesn't have a future with that team. We all know that now. So yeah, I think surprising, but you can see the more you pick away at it, the logic. What about you, mate? Are you surprised? Is this a sensible move? What's your kind of your first take?
Not so surprised in that we knew that Sargeant was under a lot of pressure. That's been the case throughout the season. There's been rumors throughout that he might not see the end of the year. It started off with people talking about Kimi Antonelli, who is also racing in F2. Actually, he's a position behind Colapinto in the standings. But of course, he's Mercedes' big hope going forward. And there was this logic, perhaps, that if Mercedes didn't want to put him in straight away to replace Lewis Hamilton next year, it now looks like that is exactly what they're going to do, and expecting an announcement fairly soon on that one. But if they didn't want to do that, then Williams would be an obvious place. But of course, things move very quickly. Carlos Sainz was available. And that's the strange thing about this situation, as you mentioned, that Colapinto is going to come in and race the rest of the season in Formula One, knowing that, unless he does something truly remarkable and he gets snapped up for, the sole remaining seat at Sauber, then it's going to be a long wait probably until he gets another go. But if you're in that position, if you're a Formula 2 driver and you get the call to go into Formula 1, you would never, ever turn it down. It's your opportunity to show what you can do. So I think, from Colapinto's side, of course, it makes perfect sense. From the Williams side, I guess they're gonna know what they've got, and that they'll have some idea based on his work in simulators, and also he did the FP1 session at Silverstone, so they'll have a basic idea of how capable he is, how able he is to deal with the amount of information that comes flying at you when you're in a Formula One seat, even just in a practice session, and being able to digest that and turn it into potential performance on the car. So they must have been impressed along those lines. And in James Vowles' statement, he talks about how important it is to Williams that their academy program does actually push drivers towards race seats, and they get opportunities. So yeah, so some logic there. But I'm like you, I'm not hugely up to date with Colapinto's.
But you've got his stat
throughout.
sheet there, I think, don't you, from just before the show? So I mean, I think a lot of our listeners will probably be in a similar boat. I mean, what are kind of the highs and lows of this guy's career? Because this is one of the funny things, just for context, for people that might be like, these two journalists don't know what they're talking about with this young guy. So often these F2 races go on, and that is the moments when we have our heads down in our laptops, we're in the paddock, we're chasing stuff up. So you hear names and you hear of performances and stuff like that, but it's very difficult to actually sit down and assess F2 drivers unless you're reporting on it. So I'm kind of curious to know what the highs and lows have been recently for him.
Yeah, I mean, there was a bit of a buzz around him, I remember initially, but I think that, it was coming from the Argentinian crew. There's an ESPN Argentinian crew, and I remember
that was my first thought was those guys are going to have a great time this weekend.
To them at one stage, and and they were fairly optimistic, but I think carefully so. It wasn't clear, or hasn't been hugely clear from his junior career, that he's this standout, was always going to make it to F1 kind of driver, whereas someone like Antonelli, that's the feeling we've had as he's gone through Frecker and so on. So yeah, Frecker, which is basically Formula 4 in 2021, he finished sixth in that. In 2023, so last year, he was fourth in Formula 3. And then this year, he's been racing in Formula 2. High point has to be Imola sprint race victory, but he's also been on the podium in Spain and Austria during feature races, which of course is that bit more difficult. It's more like a real Grand Prix, and you don't get the advantage of reverse grids and so on. So it's I think it's been a very solid season so far in F2, but not the kind of one where he would be the standout driver to get that promotion. But that's why it's so important to be a part of one of these junior driver schemes when you're in Formula 2 and when you're at that stage, because it's surprising how many opportunities do come along. I mean, Oliver Behrman, who of course stood in for Carlos Sainz in Saudi Arabia when Sainz had his appendix removed. There was a lot of buzz around him, and he was a Ferrari young driver, but even this year he struggled in Formula 2. So having that link to an F1 team, and even if your results aren't stellar in Formula 2, so that they know how good you are, the talent that you have, the reserve that you have, your ability to, say, in a engineering meeting to contribute in a positive way, to push things forward, that kind of overall driver intelligence that doesn't always come across in all the randomness of a Formula 2 season. That can be the kind of thing that actually gets these drivers the nods. So it'll be interesting when we get to Monza. I'm on my way already. Nate, I think you're leaving tomorrow, to get a feeling from within Williams, and no doubt from James Vowles, about why this decision, was in the end absolutely the one they went to go for, because it does feel like it was a fairly quick turnaround from that accident in FP3 in Zandvoort, and the unfortunate timing of that. I mean, it's never great to completely smash up a Formula 1 car, obviously, but the unfortunate timing of that was that they had all these upgrades on the car, and to go and destroy all of that hard work that the team has pushed extra hard to make sure it's on the car immediately after the summer break. That kind of stuff really does, it doesn't go down well within a Formula 1 team, and as a general morale issue and also confidence in the driver issue, it does pop up. So I mean, we've seen rookies come in mid-season before, but Nate, I mean, how big a challenge is this? My mind immediately goes to Nick de Vries, who stood in for Alex Albon when he had his appendix moved at Monza, and I wonder whether Colapinto will be hoping for something similar this weekend.
Yeah, well, I think, to that point, I think Monza is almost the perfect place for him to jump in. I think it's a place where Williams should be quite competitive, just given their car, and that I mean, that's a good thing. It was actually one of the things that De Vries's detractors actually used against him when he struggled early on with AlphaTauri. Was they said, well, he just drove a competitive Williams at Monza, and yeah, of course he looked great. So there can be bad points to that, but like you said, that this is a very different situation. Colapinto is kind of going to the situation. It's very, very unlikely that Audi are going to turn around and be like, yeah, on the basis of 6 good races, we'll take this guy because they want a slightly bigger name driver than that, than somebody who's, a rookie. So it's tough, and the biggest challenge is going to be the two after Monza. It's going to be Baku and Singapore. I mean, that is a huge, huge challenge for any driver to master. But to these young drivers' credits, I mean, I think the temperature has changed quite a lot, and I think we've seen it. It's been gradual, since. I mean, Max obviously came in, and Max just kind of shattered the perception, I think, of what really young drivers can do in Formula One, coming in at 17. But if you look at that rookie season in 2019, when we had Lando, we had George, we had Alex Albon, young guys came in, and they're still around on the grid today. And actually, if you look back through the history of recent Formula one of the few times a company didn't back one of its younger drivers now looks like one of the biggest mistakes any team has ever made, in the fact that Oscar Piastri is not driving for Alpine at the moment. He's racing with McLaren. He's a race winner, and he looks like he's going to be there for the long term. So I think that, yeah, there is a lot of pressure. I think that these teams are so confident in the way that they prepare these youngsters. They're so confident in the data that they have, confident in the fact that the guys they on board do have the right stuff, to coin a phrase from one of my favorite films. So I think it's tricky, but if you're a guy like Colapinto, to this your whole life, and suddenly you've gone from, in the space of 72 hours, wondering, well, am I ever going to get that chance, to suddenly you've got 9 races, assuming nothing drastic happens down the line, or there's not a secondary plan in motion behind the scenes. So there is a lot of pressure there, but I actually think that the fact that competing for next year's seat, the fact that he's not been brought in with a, hey, if you get this right, you're in. If you don't, you're out, and you're on the sidelines. I think that will put him into quite a unique situation, because really everyone's going to compare him to what Sargeant did. So if he can just not make those mistakes, if he just keep it out of the wall, I think immediately that looks pretty impressive, because everyone will know, hey, this guy jumped in very late. He had, like you said, he had one free practice at Silverstone, so he'll have kind of credit in the bank. And if you look at the reputation that Liam Lawson has now, on the back of 3 races last year, where, let's face it, he was pretty solid in those races. He didn't do anything spectacular, but he didn't make any major mistakes when he was standing in for Daniel Ricciardo. And now everyone is pretty overwhelmingly of the opinion that he deserves to be on the 2025 grid in some capacity. Colapinto could do the same thing. So huge chance for him. And yeah, a great talking point for us to get into in Monza. And just a quick word on Sargeant. I do hope Sargeant ends up somewhere where he can kind of race, and kind of, one of the worst things Formula One can do to a driver is it can make you always kind of that Formula One back marker. People remember you as, Max Chilton, or, maybe Latifi, if we want to use a Williams example, someone who was kind of perennially at the back. But these guys aren't slouches. Some of them might come from money and stuff like that, but Sargeant had glimpses through his junior career of someone who, has some talent there. So I hope he finds somewhere good to go. Maybe an IndyCar or a WEC or something like that. But it'll be interesting to see where he goes, and to kind of follow his career from that point, and see if, he does make a success of himself somewhere else. Because I think sometimes some drivers, Formula One is just, the lights are a little bit too bright. It's maybe just not quite the right time in their career. There's a lot of different reasons why. But yeah, hopefully Sargeant kind of lands on his feet after this, because I don't know about you, Laz, I think we're both the same. Every time I've spoken to Sargeant, lovely guy. Maybe too nice, maybe maybe there needed to be a bit more of a of a fire and a bad streak to him. We've seen that, with younger drivers before. But yeah, I hope he ends up somewhere great. But yeah, a fantastic storyline, fascinating storyline for us to dig more into this week.